Can a 3.5-pound brisket flat really turn out juicy and tender? Watch this. Today we're cooking a 3.5-pound brisket flat. Unlike a whole packer brisket, the flat is the leaner section, so there's not nearly as much internal fat to work with. That's one of the reasons brisket flats can be a little more challenging to cook. There's less fat to help protect the meat during a long cook, so I want to be careful with how I prepare this one. But that doesn't mean a brisket flat can't turn out great. With the right preparation and a little patience, you can still get a tender, juicy brisket with a great bark. So let's get this one trimmed up and ready for the smoker. The first thing I'm going to do is get this brisket trimmed up. With the brisket flat, I don't want to get too aggressive with the knife. This is already a fairly lean cut, so every bit of meat we can keep is important. I'm mainly looking for the hard pieces of fat that aren't going to render down during the cook. If the fat is hard and waxy, there really isn't much benefit to leaving it on the brisket. I'm also cleaning up some of these edges and removing any loose pieces of meat that could dry out while the brisket is cooking. On the fat cap, I'm going to leave roughly a 1/4 inch. I don't want a really thick layer of fat sitting on top because that can keep the seasoning and smoke from getting to the meat. But I also don't want to remove all of it because this is a lean cut and that little bit of fat can provide some protection during the cook. Now it's time to season this brisket. I'm going for an even coating across the entire surface. I want every bite to have some seasoning, so I'm making sure I get the sides and edges as well. I'm not trying to completely bury the brisket and rub. I want enough seasoning to give us good flavor and help build that bark while still letting the beef be the star of the show. Once everything is covered, I'll give this seasoning a little time to stick to the surface. While that's happening, I'm going to get the Weber ready. Once the smoker is settled in at our cooking temperature, the brisket will be ready to go. For this cook, I'm using the Weber for an indirect cook at around 250 degrees. The most important part of this setup is keeping the brisket away from the direct heat. We want the heat and smoke to circulate around the meat while it slowly cooks. I'm also adding a couple pieces of smoking wood. I don't think you need to completely load a smoker with wood to get smoked flavor. The flavor I'm using today is hickory wood. A couple good chunks can provide plenty of smoke, especially during the early part of the cook. I'm going to give the Weber some time to come up to temperature and stabilize before putting the brisket on. I'd much rather spend a little extra time getting the cooker settled than constantly chase the temperature after the brisket is already on. Once we're sitting around 250 degrees and everything looks good, we're ready to get this brisket on the grate. All right, the brisket is going on. I'm positioning it over indirect heat and putting the temperature probe into the thickest part of the flat. The goal now is to maintain a steady temperature, slowly build that bark, and let the brisket work its way toward tenderness. We're well into the cook now, and you can really see the bark starting to develop. This is where the brisket starts to look completely different from when we first put it on. The seasoning has darkened, the surface is drying out, and we're getting that texture we're looking for on the outside. At this point, I'm watching the bark and the overall appearance just as much as I'm watching the internal temperature. The temperature is going to continue rising, but eventually it may slow down or seem like it has stopped moving. That's completely normal during a long brisket cook. I'm not going to start changing everything just because the temperature isn't moving as quickly as I want. I want to let the brisket continue cooking and get that bark where I want it before deciding when it's time to wrap. I'm really happy with the bark at this point, so now it's time to wrap the brisket. I wanted to let it cook unwrapped long enough to develop that bark and take on some smoke before wrapping. Once I'm happy with the outside, wrapping can help us push through the rest of the cook while helping protect the brisket from getting too dry. I'm wrapping it tightly and getting it back on the Weber. From this point forward, I'm not really worried about building more bark. We've already got the color and texture I'm looking for. Now the focus is getting the inside of this brisket tender. And this is where I don't want to rely on temperature alone. Temperature can give us an idea of where we are, but it doesn't tell us exactly when this particular brisket is ready. It's always a good idea to add moisture and a little more rub to the wrap. You could use beef broth, tallow, butter, really whatever you'd like. For this cook, I just spritz it with a little more water. Now it's time to check for tenderness. I'm not looking for one specific temperature that tells me this brisket is done. I want to check several areas of the flat and see how the probe feels going into the meat. I'm looking for very little resistance, almost like the probe is sliding into warm butter. That tells me the connective tissue is broken down and the brisket is ready. When it feels right, it's time to get it off the smoker and let it rest. I'm going to let the brisket rest before cutting into it. After spending hours on the smoker, the meat needs some time to settle down. I know it's tempting to unwrap it immediately, especially after smelling brisket cooking all day, but there's no reason to rush the finish. All right, this is the moment we've been waiting for. Before I start slicing, I'm going to find the direction of the grain. Slicing against the grain is important with brisket because it shortens those muscle fibers and makes each bite easier to chew. Right away, I really like the way this bark looks. Let's get into the first few slices and see what we've got. These slices are holding together nicely, but you can still see plenty of moisture in the meat. Now let's check the bend. That's exactly what I want to see. The slice has some flexibility, but it isn't falling apart. And when I give it a little squeeze, you can see the moisture coming out. For a lean brisket flat, I'm really happy with what we're seeing so far. You can see the meat is tender enough to separate with just a little pressure, but it's still holding together instead of completely falling apart. That's exactly what I wanted to see from this brisket flat. So if you've been hesitant to cook a brisket flat because you're worried about drying it out, hopefully this cook showed you that you can get a really good result with one. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to KB's Barbecue, and let me know in the comments how you like to cook your brisket. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next cook.